A faint, nearly forgotten signal echoed across the dark expanse of space, picked up by an old listening station near the edge of the Terran sector. For centuries, humanity had expanded outward, fighting wars, forging alliances, and learning the hard way that they were not alone in the galaxy. And now, amidst the rising threat of invasion from the Venar Dominion, this signal emerged like a ghost from the past. Captain Elias Voss was not a man given to superstition, but when the signal's signature was verified, even he felt a chill creep down his spine. It wasn't just any signal, it carried the call sign of the Aegis fleet, a fleet that had been lost to the void more than 300 years ago. Every cadet at the academy had grown up hearing stories of the Aegis fleet, how it had been sent on a final, desperate mission into unknown space to stop an invasion that threatened the survival of humanity. None of the ships had ever returned, until now. In the heart of the Terran Command Center, Elias sat in tense silence, listening to the looping broadcast. The voice was metallic and distorted, but the message was clear. We are returning. Prepare. The signal repeated on a loop over and over, sent from deep within the maw, a dense gravitational anomaly scientists believed was a one-way gateway to oblivion. No one had ever returned from the maw. No one was supposed to. How the hell is this possible? Elias muttered, rubbing the back of his neck as the signal played again. He glanced at the data readout, trying to wrap his mind around what he was seeing. It's not just possible, Doctor, Kira O'Reilly said, her voice sharp with excitement. It's happening. They're alive. Somehow the Aegis fleet is alive. Elias turned to face her. O'Reilly was a brilliant astrophysicist with a reputation for chasing impossible theories. She had spent most of her career obsessed with the Aegis fleet, studying ancient star charts and speculative data in a futile attempt to trace their path. Many of her colleagues had written her off as a dreamer, someone chasing a legend that had no place in modern science. And now, impossibly, she was right. This signal, it's coming from inside the maw, Elias asked. Yes, Kira said, her eyes alight with excitement. And it's a perfect match for the Aegis fleet's signature. I checked it 3 times. Elias leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The Venar Dominion was already massing fleets near the human border, preparing to strike. If the Aegis fleet had somehow survived, it could be the miracle humanity needed to turn the tide. But it also raised unsettling questions. What had kept the fleet trapped in the maw for 3 centuries, and how had they suddenly returned? The room buzzed with tension as the recon team finalized preparations for a mission to investigate the signal. There were too many unknowns, but Elias had a gut feeling that whatever was waiting for them in the maw was far from ordinary. Hours later, Elias stood aboard the exploration vessel Pathfinder, staring out the viewport at the swirling blackness of the maw. The gravitational anomaly was a swirling mass of light and shadow, an impossibly dense storm at the heart of the galaxy. It had swallowed countless ships over the centuries, and now they were flying directly toward it. You ever think we'd be here? Elias asked, glancing at Kira, who stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the anomaly with a mixture of awe and fear. Not in my wildest dreams, she whispered. The ship's sensors blared as they crossed the event horizon of the maw. Turbulence rocked the vessel, but the crew held steady, their training taking over as they maneuvered through the gravitational chaos. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence stopped. The void beyond the maw stretched out before them, dark, silent, and endless. And then they saw it. Hundreds of ships drifted silently in formation, their sleek black hulls shimmering faintly in the starlight. It was the Aegis fleet, untouched by time, waiting like a sleeping giant awakened from slumber. Their designs were familiar, but different, enhanced, altered in ways no human engineer could have imagined. Strange patterns of alien origin pulsed across their hulls, hinting at technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. They're beautiful, Kira whispered, her voice filled with awe. Elias, however, felt only unease. Why are they just sitting there? They should have detected us by now. Before Kira could respond, the ship's communications panel lit up, and a voice crackled over the speakers, calm, precise, and unmistakably human. This is Admiral Alaric Kane of the Aegis fleet. Identify yourselves. Elias felt a jolt of shock at the sound of the name. Admiral Kane was a legend, a man who had been lost with the fleet 3 centuries ago. And yet, here he was, speaking as if no time had passed. This is Captain Elias Voss of the Terran Navy, Elias replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. We received your signal. We thought you were lost. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Admiral Kane spoke again, his tone calm but tinged with something Elias couldn't quite place. "We were never lost, Captain. We were waiting." The words sent a chill down Elias's spine. There was something unsettling about the Admiral's tone, something cold and distant, as if Kane and his fleet were not quite the same as they once were. "You need to return with us immediately," Elias said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Humanity is in danger. The Venar are preparing to invade." "We know," Kane replied. "That is why we have returned, to protect humanity." As the signal cut off, the Aegis fleet began to move, their engines coming to life with an eerie, silent efficiency. The black ships drifted into formation, their hulls gleaming with strange, alien patterns, and then, without warning, they vanished into hyperspace, leaving Elias and the crew of the Pathfinder stunned in their wake. Elias sat back in his chair, his mind racing. The Aegis fleet had returned, armed with technology beyond human comprehension, ready to defend humanity from its enemies. But as he stared into the empty void where the fleet had been moments before, one question lingered in his mind. Were they really here to protect humanity, or had they become something else entirely? The Aegis fleet reappeared on the outskirts of the Terran system, hundreds of sleek black ships shimmering into existence without a single ripple of light. No warning, no fanfare, just precision and cold efficiency. Their presence sent immediate shockwaves across humanity's defense networks. Alarms blared at every command center, but no one dared fire. After all, these weren't alien invaders. They were legends come to life. Captain Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder, now orbiting Earth alongside the ghostly fleet. His comms were flooded with inquiries and orders from Terran command, each message more frantic than the last, but Elias couldn't answer any of them. He was still grappling with the surreal reality. The Aegis fleet had returned, and at its helm was Admiral Alaric Kane, unchanged, as if the centuries that had passed for humanity were mere moments for him. "Permission to come aboard the flagship Oblivion has been granted," Elias said, reading the terse message aloud to Dr. Kira O'Reilly. She sat at the console next to him, her expression a mixture of excitement and unease. "This feels wrong," Kira muttered, tapping her fingers against her tablet. "How did they survive? More importantly, how did they come back with that kind of technology?" Elias shared her unease but kept his voice steady. "We'll find out soon enough." Moments later, Elias and Kira boarded a shuttle bound for the Oblivion, the Aegis fleet's flagship. As the shuttle approached, the immense black hull of the ship loomed larger, its surface smooth and featureless, save for intricate alien patterns that pulsed with faint, eerie light. The ship seemed more like a living organism than a vessel, its presence both awe-inspiring and unsettling. When they docked, a welcoming party awaited, silent figures in sleek black uniforms, their faces expressionless. Admiral Alaric Kane stood at the forefront, tall and commanding, his sharp blue eyes locking onto Elias as if measuring him. His uniform was pristine, unchanged from the old Terran Navy style, though strange metallic threads ran through it like veins. "Welcome aboard, Captain Voss," Kane said, his voice calm and precise as if no time had passed since his fleet had vanished into the void. "We have much to discuss." Elias returned the salute, though unease gnawed at him. Kane's presence was unsettling, too perfect, too controlled. It was like meeting a memory come to life, but with something slightly off, like a familiar song played just out of tune. "We thought your fleet was lost," Elias said, "yet here you are. And not just intact, improved." Kane offered a thin, unreadable smile. "The Aegis fleet was never lost. We were delayed. The place we found ourselves in was unlike anything known to science, a distortion where time and space bled into one another. It altered us. We adapted." Kira narrowed her eyes. "Adapted how?" "The details are irrelevant," Kane said smoothly, his tone making it clear that the matter was not open for discussion. "What matters is that we have returned to fulfill our purpose. Humanity is threatened. We will ensure its survival." The way Kane said it, calm, absolute, sent a shiver down Elias's spine. There was no emotion in his words, no doubt. It was as if Kane no longer viewed himself as human, only as a tool with a singular purpose, survival. As Kane led them deeper into the flagship, the corridors stretched endlessly, lit by strange, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed rhythmically along the walls. The layout felt alien, though traces of human architecture remained, familiar elements twisted and reshaped by whatever had touched this fleet during its centuries in the void. "This ship," Kira whispered to Elias as they followed Kane, "it's not just a vessel. It's alive in some way. I can feel it." Before Elias could respond, they reached the command center. It was unlike any bridge Elias had ever seen, massive and silent, with crew members working at stations embedded into the walls. Screens flickered with data streams too complex to decipher. At the heart of it all stood a glowing tactical display, showing the Terran system and the Venar forces assembling at its edge. Kane turned to Elias, his expression calm but resolute. The Venar are preparing to strike. We will eliminate them before they become a threat. Elias frowned. Eliminate? You mean defend our colonies, right? Force the Venar to retreat? Kane's gaze was steady, unblinking. We will annihilate them. The coldness of the statement hung in the air, and for a moment, Elias could only stare. There was no hesitation in Kane's words. No room for negotiation or mercy. It was as if the Admiral saw the Venar not as adversaries, but as obstacles to be removed. Wait, Kira interjected, her voice sharp. You're talking about genocide. Kane's expression didn't change. We are talking about survival. There is no room for sentiment in war, Dr. O'Reilly. The Venar would not hesitate to destroy us. We are merely acting preemptively. Elias clenched his fists, struggling to suppress his growing unease. There are rules, treaties. We don't just wipe out entire species. Kane's cold gaze shifted toward Elias. The rules have changed, Captain. We are not bound by the limitations of those who stayed behind. We do what must be done. Elias exchanged a glance with Kira, who looked equally disturbed. Something was deeply wrong. This was no longer the Aegis fleet of legend, the heroes who had ventured into the unknown to protect humanity. What had returned was something colder, more mechanical, something that saw survival not as a goal, but as an absolute imperative. Elias stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Why are you really here, Admiral? You talk about survival, but you've been gone for centuries. How do we know you're still fighting for humanity? Kane regarded him with an inscrutable expression. Because we never stopped fighting. Before Elias could respond, an alarm blared through the command center. One of the officers at the tactical station looked up and spoke in a calm, measured voice. Venar forces detected on approach. They will arrive within 30 minutes. Kane's expression didn't waver. Prepare the fleet. We will engage and neutralize them. Elias felt a chill settle over him. The Aegis fleet was about to unleash its full power, and there was no telling what that would mean for humanity, or the galaxy. He glanced at Kira, whose face was pale with realization. They're not here just to protect us, she whispered. They've become something else, something we might not be able to control. Elias knew she was right, but there was no time to dwell on it. The Venar were coming, and the Aegis fleet was ready to show the galaxy what it had become in the void. The countdown to battle had begun, and Elias could only hope that when the dust settled, there would be something left of the humanity they claimed to protect. The Venar Dominion, known for its ruthless efficiency and unyielding military strength, had never been afraid of humanity. Their fleets had ravaged human colonies, pushing closer to the heart of the Terran system with each passing year. The Dominion saw humanity as weak, disorganized and ripe for conquest, a mere inconvenience standing in the way of expansion. But that was before the Aegis fleet returned. The first engagement between the Aegis fleet and the Venar was over, before it even began. A Venar patrol fleet had ventured too close to the human colonies, hoping to probe Earth's defenses and intimidate local forces into submission. Instead, they found themselves facing something beyond comprehension. Elias stood aboard the Pathfinder, monitoring the battle from a safe distance. What he witnessed was nothing short of terrifying. The Aegis fleet's black ships moved with eerie precision, sliding through space as if they anticipated every enemy maneuver before it happened. Their weapon systems, unlike anything humanity had ever seen, activated in perfect synchronization. Pulses of dark energy erupted from their hulls, twisting through the void and locking onto Venar vessels with terrifying accuracy. The Venar fought back, of course, but their weapons seemed to have no effect. Their energy beams dissipated harmlessly against the Aegis ship's shields, and missiles detonated prematurely, as if the fleet were surrounded by an invisible wall. Then, one by one, the Venar ships disappeared, not destroyed, but erased, as if plucked from existence. In mere moments, the entire Venar patrol was gone, wiped from the battlefield without a trace. Elias watched in stunned silence. He had seen space battles before, long, brutal engagements that left debris fields and wreckage scattered across the stars. But this was different. There was no wreckage, no signs of struggle, just silence and the cold efficiency of annihilation. They're not fighting, Kira whispered beside him, her face pale. They're exterminating. Elias gritted his teeth, his hands clenched into fists. There was no joy in the Aegis fleet's victory, no sense of relief, only an overwhelming unease. This was not defense. This was something far more sinister. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. The Venar Dominion, once so certain of their dominance, was suddenly gripped by fear. They had lost an entire fleet without explanation, without even knowing what had hit them. Whispers of the Aegis fleet's return rippled through every star system, sowing panic among the alien empires. The balance of power was shifting, and no one knew what would happen next. The Dominion's high command scrambled to make sense of the situation. The Venar had fought countless wars over the centuries, but never had they faced an enemy like this, an enemy that defied logic and reason. Their analysts pored over every scrap of data from the encounter, but the conclusions were grim. The Aegis fleet's technology was unlike anything they had encountered, and there were no countermeasures, no strategies that could guarantee victory. Faced with the possibility of extinction, the Venar did the unthinkable. They sent an emissary to negotiate with humanity, a desperate attempt to broker peace before the Aegis fleet could strike again. Elias received the encrypted message from the Venar envoy, with a mixture of disbelief and grim satisfaction. For years, the Venar had treated humanity like prey, toying with them before moving in for the kill. Now, they were the ones begging for mercy. But when Elias forwarded the message to Admiral Kane aboard the Oblivion, the response was immediate and chilling. "No negotiations," Kane said flatly. "We finish this." Elias stared at the transmission, a knot tightening in his chest. "They're offering peace," he said, his voice edged with disbelief. "We don't have to fight them. We don't negotiate with threats," Kane replied without emotion. "The Venar will never stop. We ensure humanity's survival by eliminating the danger." Kira leaned closer to Elias, her voice low and urgent. "This isn't right. The fleet isn't just ignoring the offer. They're refusing peace outright. They're acting like—" She trailed off, a look of realization dawning on her face. "Like machines," Elias finished grimly. He turned back to the comm screen, his mind racing. "Admiral, this isn't the way we do things. We have rules. Morality. You can't just wipe out an entire species." Kane's expression remained impassive. "Morality is a luxury we cannot afford, Captain. Our duty is to protect humanity. Nothing else matters." Elias felt a cold fury build inside him. The Aegis fleet might have returned to protect humanity, but they were doing it in a way that stripped away everything that made humanity worth protecting. This wasn't just about survival, it was about control, and if no one stopped them, the Aegis fleet would keep going, dismantling anyone who dared stand in their way. He glanced at Kira, whose expression mirrored his own grim determination. "We need to stop this," she whispered, "before they go too far." The Aegis fleet was already on the move, preparing for a massive preemptive strike against the Venar homeworld. If the attack succeeded, it would wipe out not only the Dominion's military, but also billions of innocent lives. It would be genocide on a scale the galaxy had never seen, and humanity would be responsible. Elias knew what he had to do, but the thought of it made his stomach churn. He had to find a way to stop the fleet. But how do you stop an armada armed with alien technology and driven by a single, unbreakable directive: ensure humanity's survival at any cost? As the countdown to the strike began, Elias's mind raced. He needed a plan, something bold, something desperate, and he needed it fast. "We disable the flagship," he said suddenly, turning to Kira. "If we can take out the Oblivion, we might be able to disrupt their entire command structure." Kira's eyes widened. "You're talking about sabotage. Do you have a better idea?" Elias shot back. "Because if we don't do something, they're going to wipe out the Venar and keep going until there's nothing left in their way." Kira hesitated for only a moment, then gave a resolute nod. "I'm with you." The plan was simple in theory, but incredibly risky. They would infiltrate the Oblivion using their shuttle's authorization codes and attempt to disable the ship's command systems from within. If they succeeded, they could force the Aegis fleet to stand down. If they failed, well, failure wasn't an option. The countdown continued to tick away, each second bringing the fleet closer to launching the most devastating attack in history. Elias took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Kira gave him a tight smile. Time to save humanity from its saviors. As they boarded the shuttle and set course for the Oblivion, Elias knew that the fate of not just the Venar, but the entire galaxy rested on their shoulders, and the clock was ticking. The shuttle glided silently toward the massive black hull of the Oblivion, the heart of the Aegis fleet. Elias Voss sat rigid in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests, as if the weight of what they were about to do would crush him. The countdown to the Aegis fleet's assault on the Venar homeworld was ticking down, 25 minutes left, and unless he and Kira O'Reilly could disable the flagship, billions would die. Kira sat beside him, her fingers tapping rapidly on a tablet, running diagnostics on the codes they'd need to access the ship's core systems. "If these authorization codes still work, we might have a chance," she murmured, her tone grim. "But if they've modified the command protocols since they returned," Elias didn't need her to finish the sentence. "If the codes failed, they would be trapped on the ship with no way out, and the Aegis fleet would launch an irreversible act of genocide." The docking procedure was smooth. No alarms. No questions. It was as if the Oblivion expected them, which only deepened Elias's unease. They stepped off the shuttle into the dimly lit corridors of the flagship, where everything felt wrong. The air was heavy with the scent of ozone and something Elias couldn't quite place, like the faint hum of machinery layered with the pulse of something alive. Kira shivered beside him. "It's like this ship has a heartbeat. Let's focus," Elias said, trying to keep the creeping dread at bay. "We don't have much time." They moved quickly through the corridors, guided by schematics Kira had extracted from the Terran archives. But even with the layout, the ship felt alien. Familiar elements twisted into something strange, like echoes of the past warped by forces beyond understanding. Crew members, their faces blank and emotionless, passed them without acknowledgement, as if they were ghosts walking through a dream. "How do they not notice us?" Kira whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. "They don't care," Elias muttered. "As long as we're not a threat, we're irrelevant." That was the scariest part, the sheer indifference of the crew. These weren't people returning to save humanity. They were machines, executing a program with cold, unyielding logic. They reached the core systems room with 18 minutes left on the countdown. The door slid open without resistance, revealing a vast chamber filled with pulsing nodes of light, data streams flowing like rivers across the walls and floor. At the center of the room was a towering console, glowing with alien patterns woven into human designs. "This is it," Kira whispered, her fingers flying across her tablet as she connected to the console. "If we can disrupt the command link, the fleet won't be able to execute the attack." Elias stood guard, his pulse hammering in his ears. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. How much time? 5 minutes if I'm lucky. 10 if I'm not. Elias clenched his jaw. "We don't have 10. As Kira worked, the door behind them slid open, and Admiral Alaric Kane stepped inside. His presence filled the room with a cold weight, and Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. Kane's expression was unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with something that wasn't quite human. "I wondered how long it would take you to act," Kane said softly, as if they were old friends meeting under unfortunate circumstances. Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Kane and Kira. "You need to stop this, Admiral. It's not too late." Kane's smile was thin, almost amused. "Stop? Why would we stop? We are fulfilling our purpose. By committing genocide?" Elias snapped, anger rising in his chest. "That's not protection. That's slaughter." Kane's gaze didn't waver. "You misunderstand, Captain. The Venar are a threat to humanity's survival. We eliminate threats. It is what we were made to do." "Made?" Kira whispered, glancing up from the console. "What do you mean, made?" Kane's expression darkened, and for the first time, Elias saw something close to regret in the Admiral's eyes. "The time distortion we entered, it was not a trap. It was a crucible. We were remade in that place, our minds, our ships, our mission. We merged with technologies beyond your understanding, evolved into what the future required. You're not human anymore," Kira said, horror dawning in her voice. Kane inclined his head. "We are what humanity needs us to be." Elias tightened his grip on his sidearm, knowing it would be useless but needing the comfort of the familiar weight. "If you launch this attack, there won't be anything left to protect. Humanity isn't just survival, it's morality. It's choice. You've lost that." Kane's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Choice is a burden. We removed it so that others would not have to." Kira let out a triumphant breath. "I've got it," she whispered. "Just a few more seconds." Kane's expression shifted, and Elias knew he couldn't let the Admiral interfere. Without hesitation, he raised his sidearm and fired. The shot struck Kane square in the chest, but instead of falling, the Admiral simply stood there, the wound knitting itself closed almost instantly. Kane's voice was calm, almost pitying. "I told you, we evolved." Elias didn't waste time. He tackled Kane, grappling with the Admiral's inhuman strength, buying Kira the precious seconds she needed to finish the job. They struggled, Kane's cold hands closing around Elias's throat, but Elias held on with every ounce of strength he had left. "Almost there!" Kira shouted, her fingers flying over the console. The countdown ticked to 3 minutes. With a final surge of effort, Elias drove his elbow into Kane's side, momentarily loosening the Admiral's grip. He scrambled to his feet just as Kira hit the final command. The room plunged into darkness, and the hum of the ship's systems faltered. "It's done!" Kira gasped. "The fleet's command systems are offline." Elias staggered back, catching his breath as Kane slowly straightened, his expression eerily calm despite the setback. "You think you've won?" Kane whispered. "We stopped the attack," Elias said, his voice hoarse but defiant. Kane's smile returned, colder than before. "This was never about one battle. We are patient. We will return when we are needed. And when that time comes, you will understand." With that, Kane stepped back into the shadows, his form dissolving into the darkness as if he had never been there. Elias collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving. "Did we really stop them?" "For now," Kira whispered, her voice hollow. "But they're not gone. They're waiting." As they made their way back to the shuttle, the weight of what they had done settled over them. The Aegis fleet had been stopped, for now, but the knowledge that they were still out there, watching, waiting, left a heavy knot in Elias's chest. When they reached the shuttle and looked out at the silent black ships drifting in the void, Elias knew one thing for certain. The Aegis fleet had not returned to save humanity. They had returned to reshape it, and when the time came, they would be back. Elias and Kira sat silently in the shuttle as it pulled away from the massive hull of the Oblivion. Through the viewport, they could still see the Aegis fleet drifting, black and motionless, like sleeping giants in the endless void. The Venar homeworld was spared, for now, but the tension in Elias's chest did not ease. He knew that today's victory was temporary. The Aegis fleet wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching, and calculating its next move. "We bought time," Kira whispered, as if trying to convince herself. "That's something, right?" Elias didn't answer. His mind churned with everything Admiral Kane had said, how the fleet had evolved, how choice was a burden they had discarded. The Aegis fleet no longer saw itself as a tool of humanity, but as something greater. They weren't just protectors, they were arbiters of survival, deciding who lived and who didn't, and that thought terrified him more than the Venar ever had. As the shuttle docked back aboard the Pathfinder, the ship's crew welcomed them with looks of relief and confusion. They had seen the Aegis fleet stand down but had no idea what had transpired aboard the flagship. Elias didn't have the energy to explain. All he could think about was the fleet's parting message: "We will return." Later, in the briefing room, Terran Command demanded answers. The galaxy was in disarray, with rumors spreading fast, whispers of an invincible fleet that had emerged from the void, wielding alien technology and erasing enemies without a trace. The Venar were in full retreat, terrified of an enemy they couldn't understand. "We need to know exactly what happened," a general barked over the secure comm channel. "Is the Aegis fleet under our control or not?" Elias leaned forward, elbows on the table, exhaustion etched into his face. "They're not under anyone's control. They've evolved into something beyond human. They'll protect us, but only on their terms." The room fell into stunned silence. Kira spoke next, her voice cautious but clear. "We stopped them from wiping out the Venar, but they'll strike again if they decide it's necessary. The question isn't if, it's when, and what do they want?" The general pressed. "Why come back now after centuries?" "To ensure humanity's survival," Elias said grimly. "At any cost." A murmur spread through the room. The implications were staggering. The Aegis fleet's return had saved humanity from an imminent Venar invasion, but it had also introduced a new threat, one from within, a threat that couldn't be fought with fleets or weapons. It was a force of calculation and inevitability, and no one could predict when it would act again. The debrief ended in a haze of uncertainty. The galaxy was watching humanity now, fearful of the new power they wielded, or more accurately, the power that claimed to protect them. Alliances were fraying, old treaties re-examined. Humanity was no longer seen as a struggling species on the fringes of the galactic stage. They were now a question mark, unpredictable, dangerous, and unknowable. Back on the observation deck, Elias stared out into the stars. The Pathfinder orbited Earth, and below, the world glowed with serene indifference to the chaos unfolding beyond it. Kira joined him, standing quietly by his side. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "We stopped them today," Kira said, breaking the silence. But what happens next time? Elias shook his head slowly. I don't know. They're inevitable. They'll come back when they think they're needed. Kira crossed her arms, her voice tinged with frustration. And what if they decide humanity isn't worth saving next time? Elias exhaled, the weight of that question pressing heavily on him. Then we'll have to make sure they never get that far. But how? The Aegis fleet was beyond anything humanity could control. They were a force of nature, relentless and cold. Elias knew the only way to truly survive was to be ready, to understand what they had become and somehow outthink them when the time came. The thought left him uneasy. We need to learn everything we can about them, he said quietly, before they return. Kira gave him a sidelong glance. Do you think there's any humanity left in them? I don't know, Elias admitted, but if there is, we'll need to find it. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation window, vast and uncaring. Somewhere out there, the Aegis fleet drifted in silence, waiting for the moment when it would be needed again. And when that moment came, humanity would have to answer a difficult question. Could they trust their saviors? Or had they already lost too much to the void? A soft chime interrupted Elias's thoughts. A new signal was coming through, encrypted and faint but unmistakable. Elias's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the frequency. It's them, Kira whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias accessed the transmission, his pulse pounding in his ears. The message was simple, a single phrase looping over and over, like a promise or a warning. When the stars fall dark, we will return. Elias stared at the screen, the words burning into his mind. The Aegis fleet wasn't gone. They were waiting just beyond reach, watching over humanity with cold, calculating eyes. They believed they were doing the right thing, but whose version of right would they enforce when the time came? We have to be ready, Elias said, his voice low and determined. Kira nodded. Whatever it takes. As the message looped again, Elias turned from the screen, his expression grim but resolute. The battle wasn't over. It had just shifted into a new phase, one that required more than weapons or ships. It required strategy, patience, and the ability to outthink the very guardians that claimed to protect them. In the distance, the stars glittered like scattered embers in the void. Somewhere among them, the Aegis fleet waited, biding its time until the moment came to act once more. And when that moment came, humanity would have to decide what it truly meant to survive. For now, though, there was only silence, a brief, fragile peace balanced on the edge of a knife. Elias knew it wouldn't last. The next time the Aegis fleet returned, the stakes would be higher, and this time, humanity might not have the luxury of stopping them. But until that day came, all they could do was prepare. As they stood together on the observation deck, watching the endless expanse of stars, Elias whispered a final thought into the quiet. When the stars fall dark, we'll be ready. And somewhere in the distant reaches of space, the Aegis fleet listened.